This testimony is being recorded from a moving location. I cannot remain in one place for long. My name is Grand Ayatollah Suleiman Al-Mahdi, and until 3 months ago, I was one of the most influential Shia scholars operating inside Sudan's fragile religious power structure. By lineage, scholarship, and political backing, I advised generals, tribal leaders, and religious councils across Khartoum and Port Sudan. I issued rulings that shaped thousands of lives. But now, after what happened to me, my name is on a silent watch list. And Sudan is panicking. 61 hours. That is how long I was gone. My body lay motionless in a private military hospital in Khartoum, my heart beating, my brain functioning, but I would not wake. The doctors had no explanation. They called my condition medically impossible. But I was not asleep. I was somewhere else. I was being shown something. A vision of Sudan's future. A specific night during a national fast. A specific event that will happen above the riverfront mosque in Khartoum itself. What I saw during those 61 hours has Sudanese intelligence, military officials, and religious authorities across the Islamic world desperate to silence me before you hear what I have to say. This video may not stay online for long. What you are about to hear has already triggered emergency meetings in Khartoum and fractured religious councils across Sudan. But if you are watching this now, perhaps it is because you were meant to hear what is coming in 2026. As I mentioned, my name is Grand Ayatollah Suleiman Al-Mahdi. I am 52 years old. I was born in Omdurman into a family that traces its bloodline through generations of Islamic judges and teachers. My father memorized the Quran by age 10. I did by age 8. By 16, I was already teaching younger students in our mosque. I studied theology and jurisprudence in Qom, Iran, and later in Najaf, Iraq, absorbing not just religious scholarship but political Islam and the art of religious authority. When I returned to Sudan, my reputation grew quickly. I advised war councils during the conflicts in Darfur. I mediated tribal disputes that could have ignited entire regions. I wrote fatwas that carried weight across Sudan's fractured political and religious landscape. For over 2 decades, I operated from my office near the Grand Mosque in Khartoum, issuing religious rulings that guided hundreds of thousands of Sudanese Muslims. I taught at Islamic universities. I appeared on national television during Ramadan. I counseled government ministers and military generals on matters of Islamic law. People called me Sheikh of Stability, because in a nation torn by civil war, economic collapse, and political chaos, my voice was supposed to represent order and religious certainty. But stability was an illusion I had built on sand. And now, after what happened to me on the night of 14th January, 2026, I am a marked man in Sudan. I did not die that night, but what happened to me was perhaps more terrifying than death. I fell into a state that no doctor could explain. A coma that lasted exactly 61 hours. And while my body lay motionless in a guarded hospital room in Khartoum, I was somewhere else entirely. I was standing in the presence of absolute holiness. I met Jesus Christ face to face. I saw a vision of what will happen in Sudan in the coming months. Something so disruptive to the religious and political order that the regime would rather discredit me than let me speak about it publicly. This testimony is being recorded from an undisclosed location as I move between safe houses. I cannot tell you where I am because there are people actively searching for me. What you are about to hear has gone viral across Sudan despite attempts to contain it. Intelligence officers have monitored my family. Religious councils have issued statements questioning my mental state. Anonymous threats have been made against anyone who shares this testimony. But if you are watching this now, perhaps it is because you were meant to hear what is coming to Sudan. Perhaps this warning was meant to reach you. It was Tuesday night, 14th January, 2026, just after 11 p.m. I was alone in my private study near the Nile in my home in Khartoum. My wife had retired to bed earlier. The city was quiet except for the distant hum of generators and the occasional rumble of military patrol vehicles on the streets below, a sound every Sudanese has learned to sleep through. I had been preparing a sermon on divine authority and the role of religious scholars in guiding the nation. It was meant to be delivered that Friday at the Grand Mosque. The irony of what I was writing would only become clear to me later. I remember the moment everything changed. But before I tell you about that night, you need to understand who I was, what I had, what I was about to lose. I was born in Omdurman in 1974, in a house that still stands near the Khalifa's tomb. My family name, Al-Mahdi, carries weight in Sudan. We are not descendants of the Mahdi who led the revolt against the British, but we trace our lineage through 7 generations of Islamic judges, muftis, and Quranic scholars. In our family, religious authority was not a career choice. It was inheritance, destiny, duty. My father, Sheikh Abdul Rahman Al-Mahdi, memorized the Quran by age 10. I did it by 8. Not because I was more gifted, but because I was more driven. I wanted to prove I belonged to the legacy I had been born into. By 16, I was already teaching younger students in our neighborhood mosque, explaining verses my peers still struggled to pronounce. When I was 19, my father sent me to Qom, Iran, the beating heart of Shia scholarship. For 3 years, I studied under Grand Ayatollahs who had taught thousands before me. I absorbed theology, Islamic jurisprudence, and something more dangerous, political Islam. The art of wielding religious authority as both spiritual guidance and political power. From Qom, I went to Najaf, Iraq, where I studied under scholars who had survived wars, purges, and regime changes. They taught me that religious authority is not just about knowing the texts, it is about knowing when to speak, when to stay silent, and how to survive in nations where religion and politics are inseparable. When I returned to Sudan in 1998, I was 24 years old with credentials that opened every door. Sudan was fracturing. The civil war between North and South was bleeding the nation dry. Darfur was beginning to burn. The government needed religious voices who could provide legitimacy, and I became one of them. Within 5 years, I was advising war councils on matters of Islamic law during military operations. I mediated tribal conflicts in regions where a single wrong word could ignite violence that would kill hundreds. I wrote fatwas that determined whether marriages were valid, whether business contracts were permissible, whether certain political alliances violated Islamic principles. My office near the Grand Mosque in Khartoum became a place of power. Ministers came to me. Generals consulted me. Tribal elders sought my rulings to settle disputes that courts could not touch. My voice on national television during Ramadan reached millions. People called me Sheikh of Stability, because in a nation defined by chaos, I represented order, religious certainty, a voice that could calm tensions and provide answers when everything else was falling apart. But there was a cost to that stability. Every fatwa I issued bound someone's life. Every ruling I made shaped destinies I would never witness. Young men I counseled went to fight in wars I justified. Families fractured over interpretations I declared authoritative. Women were bound to marriages I ruled unbreakable. I told myself I was serving God and guiding the faithful. But late at night, in my private study, questions I could not silence began to surface. Why did Isa, Jesus, perform miracles no other prophet did? Why did he speak of forgiveness with an authority that eclipsed judgment? Why did the Quranic accounts of his life leave me unsettled rather than satisfied? I buried those questions beneath sermons, scholarship, and the weight of my reputation. I told myself they were tests of faith, whispers of doubt that every scholar faces. But they grew louder. Especially in the silent hours before dawn, when I was alone with the texts and no one was watching. I was building an empire of influence on a foundation I had never truly examined. I had power. I had respect. I had authority that shaped thousands of lives. But I was building on sand. And I didn't know it. Not until the night of 14th January, 2026, when everything I had built came crashing down in a single moment. When the air in my study changed, and I realized I was no longer alone. 14th January, 2026, 11:17 p.m. The night was unremarkable by Khartoum standards. The city had settled into its usual rhythm of controlled chaos. Distant generators humming their irregular pulse, the occasional rumble of military patrol vehicles on the streets below, the ever-present tension that every Sudanese had learned to breathe like air. My study overlooked the Nile. Through the window, I could see the dark water reflecting scattered lights from the opposite bank. The city had been experiencing rolling blackouts for weeks. Tonight was no different. I sat at my desk surrounded by books I had collected over 3 decades. Tafsirs, Hadith compilations, volumes of Islamic jurisprudence stacked in careful towers. My laptop glowed in the semi-darkness, displaying the half-finished sermon I had been crafting for Friday's gathering at the Grand Mosque. The title, Divine Authority and the Responsibility of Religious Leadership. I had no idea how soon I would understand what those words actually meant. My wife, Amina, had gone to bed 2 hours earlier. The house was silent except for the soft scratch of my pen on paper, as I made notes in the margins of my text. I was alone with my thoughts, my books, and questions I still refused to confront directly. Then the air changed. It happened so suddenly I looked up, thinking someone had entered the room. But the door remained closed. No footsteps, no movement, just presence. The air became heavy, not oppressive. I have felt oppressive air before. The suffocating heat of Khartoum summers, the weight of fear during military crackdowns. This was different. This was holy. The temperature didn't change, but I felt it in my chest, a pressure that made me aware of every breath. The sounds of the city outside seemed to fade, as if someone had turned down the volume on reality itself. I tried to stand. My legs wouldn't respond. My chest tightened. Not like a heart attack. I have seen men suffer those. This was something else. Something internal and external at once, as if the very space around me was pressing in, demanding attention, demanding surrender. The walls of my study began to dissolve at the edges of my vision. Not physically. They were still there, but they were becoming translucent, irrelevant, as if reality itself was becoming optional. Panic seized me. I opened my mouth to call for my wife, but no sound came. I reached for my desk to steady myself, but my hand passed through empty air. Or perhaps the desk was still there, and I was the one becoming insubstantial. Then I felt it, a pulling sensation deep in my chest. Not my body, my consciousness. Something was separating, unraveling, being drawn upward and outward by a force I could neither see nor resist. My last coherent thought was to whisper a verse from Surah Al-Ikhlas, Kul huwa Allahu Ahad. Say, He is Allah, the One. Then everything vanished. The medical team arrived at 11:34 p.m. My wife found me slumped in my chair, eyes open but unseeing, breathing but unresponsive. She screamed my name, shook my shoulders. Nothing. She called my assistant. He called the Ministry of Religious Affairs. Within 20 minutes, I was in an ambulance racing toward the military hospital in Khartoum, the one reserved for government officials and high-ranking clerics. Dr. Khalid Usman, the chief physician, examined me immediately. Heart rate, normal. Blood pressure, stable. Brain activity, present. Reflexes, absent. He ran every test available. CT scan, MRI, blood work, neurological assessments. Every result came back normal. Except I would not wake. This is medically impossible, Dr. Usman told my wife at 2:15 a.m. His body is functioning perfectly. There is no trauma, no stroke, no neurological damage we can detect. But he is completely unresponsive to external stimuli. By dawn, Word had spread. Religious officials arrived. Intelligence officers took positions outside my room. Phone calls were made to Tehran, to Najaf, to Qom. My condition became a matter of state security. The 61-hour countdown had begun. But I wasn't unconscious. I was somewhere else entirely. Suddenly, I was awake. But not in my body. There was no pain. No weight pressing on my chest. No breath moving in and out of lungs. Yet I was more aware, more present, than I had ever been in my physical life. I existed. Fully conscious. Hyper-alert. But stripped of everything that had defined my existence for 52 years. I tried to look down at myself, and realized I had no hands to see. No body to orient myself with. Just pure consciousness suspended in absolute darkness. The silence was total. Not the absence of sound, but something deeper. The silence before creation, before words, before anything existed to make noise. Then, in the distance, I saw light. Not sunlight. Not lamplight. Not any light I had ever encountered. This light was alive. It moved toward me, or I moved toward it. I could not tell which. Distance had no meaning here. But with every moment, the light grew closer, brighter, more overwhelming. And as it approached, I realized something terrifying. The light could see me. Not just my body or my actions. It saw through me. Into me. Every hidden motive, every suppressed doubt, every prideful decision I had ever made unfolded before me like pages torn from a book and scattered in the wind. Moments I had forgotten came rushing back with perfect clarity. The fatwa I issued knowing it would benefit my political allies more than serve justice. The young student I humiliated publicly to protect my reputation. The tribal dispute I settled not with wisdom, but with favoritism. The sermon I preached about humility, while my heart swelled with pride at the crowd's applause. Every lie. Every compromise. Every time I used religion as a weapon instead of a path to truth. They were all there. Exposed. Undeniable. But then came something worse. Faces began to appear in the light. Faces I recognized. Students I had taught. Soldiers I had counseled. Families who had trusted my rulings. And I saw what became of them. The young man I pushed toward extremism with my rhetoric about holy war, I watched him die in the desert, far from home, believing God wanted his violence. The woman trapped in an abusive marriage because my fatwa declared divorce impermissible in her case, I felt her despair as if it were my own. The community torn apart by a ruling I made without fully understanding the consequences. I witnessed the fractures that never healed. The crushing weight of realization struck me. I was not being judged only for myself. I was being judged for everyone I had influenced. For every soul I had shaped with my authority. For every life redirected by my words. For every person who trusted me to guide them toward God, and instead I led them toward my own interpretation, my own power, my own kingdom. Everything I had built was contaminated. Every sermon. Every fatwa. Every moment of influence. Because I had built it all on a foundation I never truly examined. I had wielded authority without surrendering to truth. I had spoken for God while serving myself. The terror of that moment was absolute. I was being exposed before perfect holiness, while carrying the weight of thousands of souls I had misled. The guilt was unbearable. The shame was crushing. I wanted to cease existing, to dissolve into the darkness and never face what I had become. Then, through the overwhelming light and the cacophony of my own condemnation, I heard a voice. It spoke my childhood name. The name my mother called me before titles and positions and religious authority defined my identity. Suleiman. Not accusatory. Not condemning. Gentle. Knowing. Full of something I didn't deserve and couldn't explain. The light around me shifted. The exposure didn't stop. I could still see everything I had done, everything I had failed to be, but the quality of the light changed. It was no longer just revealing my darkness. It was inviting me forward. And then I saw him. He stood before me. Not distant. Not symbolic. Not a vision or a metaphor or a theological concept. Real. Jesus Christ. I had studied him as Isa in the Quran, a prophet, a messenger, born of a virgin, performer of miracles. I had taught about him for decades. I had explained him, categorized him, fit him into a framework that made sense within my theology. But nothing I had studied prepared me for this. His eyes carried something I had never encountered, love and truth existing together without compromise. Not love that overlooked truth. Not truth that crushed with judgment. Both, perfectly held, looking directly at me. His hands bore scars. I couldn't look away from them. Wounds that shouldn't exist on a prophet who, according to everything I had been taught, was never crucified. Yet there they were, undeniable, impossible, real. Everything I had defended for 30 years collapsed in an instant. Every argument I had constructed about who he was and wasn't. Every theological framework I had used to contain him. Every carefully reasoned position I had taken about his nature, his mission, his claims. It all crumbled. I fell inwardly, not physically, because I had no body here, but something deeper than physical collapse. My entire identity as a scholar, as a religious authority, as someone who knew and could explain God, it shattered. I was wrong, I heard myself say. Not out loud. I had no mouth to speak with, but the words came from the deepest part of my being. I was wrong about everything. Jesus did not condemn me. He didn't need to. The light had already exposed everything. But instead of pronouncing judgment, he did something I didn't expect. He showed me my life. Not all of it. Specific moments. Choices I had made that I had long justified or forgotten. I watched myself at 26, returning from Najaf, feeling the first stirrings of doubt about Islamic theology, and deliberately suppressing them because acknowledging them would cost me the position I was being offered. I saw myself at 34, preparing a sermon where I knew the truth was more nuanced than what I was about to preach, but choosing the version that would strengthen my reputation instead. I witnessed myself at 41, in a private conversation with a young scholar who asked me the same questions about Jesus that haunted my own sleepless nights, and I shut him down harshly, publicly, because his questions threatened to expose my own doubts. Moment after moment. Year after year. Every time I chose fear over truth. Every time I chose reputation over seeking God. Every time I built my kingdom instead of surrendering to his. Then Jesus spoke. His voice was nothing like I imagined. Not booming. Not harsh. Steady. Certain. Carrying weight that didn't need volume to command absolute attention. Suleiman, he said, you built power. I offer life. 4 words that destroyed and rebuilt me simultaneously. I had spent my entire adult life accumulating religious authority, political influence, scholarly credentials. I had built an empire of fatwas and followers and reputation. And he was offering something entirely different. Not power. Life. Not control. Freedom. Not earned. Given. Then came the moment that undid me completely. I died for you, Jesus said. Not because you earned it. Not because you were righteous. Because I love you. Grace. Unearned. Undeserved. Devastating in its generosity. My theological mind tried to process it, tried to find the category, the framework, the system of religious merit that would make this make sense. But there was no framework. This wasn't a transaction. It wasn't a reward for spiritual achievement. It wasn't something I could earn through scholarship or prayer or pilgrimage. It was a gift. Free. Complete. Offered to someone who had spent decades teaching the opposite, that salvation was earned through submission, through works, through proper adherence to religious law. And now, standing before the source of all truth, I realized how backwards I had been. Jesus looked at me with those impossible eyes and asked a question I never expected to face. Will you accept my gift? Not, will you serve me? Not, will you prove yourself worthy? Will you accept what I freely give? Every theological argument I had ever made against this moment rose up in my mind and dissolved like smoke. Yes, I said. Broken. Surrendered. Empty of everything except desperate need. Yes. Jesus' expression shifted, not quite a smile, but something like joy breaking through grief. Then, Suleiman, he said, before I send you back, you must see what is coming. The space around us shifted, and Sudan appeared below me like a living map. The space around us shifted. Suddenly, Sudan appeared beneath me like a living map stretching from the Red Sea to the western deserts. I could see it all at once: Khartoum, Darfur, Port Sudan, Kasla, the entire nation laid out below me in perfect clarity. I hovered above Khartoum, watching the Nile split the city like a vein of light cutting through darkness. It was night, but I could see everything as if reality itself had become transparent. Then the scene focused. A specific moment. A specific location. The riverfront mosque near the presidential palace. I recognized it immediately. One of the largest gathering places in Khartoum. And it was filled beyond capacity. Thousands of people crowded the grounds, spilling out onto the streets, packed shoulder to shoulder. Prayer mats covered every available space. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. A national fast, I somehow knew. A desperate cry to God during a time of crisis. I watched them pray, men, women, children, their voices rising in unison, calling out to Allah for mercy, for intervention, for salvation from the chaos consuming their nation. Then the sky tore open. Not with clouds or thunder. With brilliance. Pure, blinding, undeniable light ripped through the darkness above the mosque like fabric being torn in two. The sudden illumination turned night into something beyond day, a radiance that didn't come from any natural source. The prayers stopped mid-sentence. Thousands of faces turned upward simultaneously. Confusion rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Phones lifted instinctively, the modern reflex to capture what the mind cannot immediately process. And above the mosque, invisible, public, unmistakable glory, Jesus appeared. Not hidden, not symbolic, not requiring faith to perceive. Physical, present, real. His form blazed with the same light that had exposed me, but now it was directed at an entire nation. I watched faces illuminated by glory they had never expected to encounter. Then he spoke. His voice didn't shout, yet it penetrated every heart, every mind, every soul within range. It moved through the air and through the people simultaneously. I am Jesus Christ. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I died for you. I rose for you. I call Sudan to life. Chaos erupted instantly. Some fell to their knees, overcome. Some ran in terror. Some wept uncontrollably, hands raised toward the sky. Others screamed prayers they no longer understood. Verses from the Quran mixing with cries for mercy, confusion giving way to something between terror and hope. Phones were everywhere now. Live streams broadcasting to Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. The moment going viral in real time across Sudan and beyond. I could hear the fragments of panicked commentary. What is this? Is this real? Are you seeing this? Allahu Akbar. What is happening? Then the vision widened. Across Sudan, in refugee camps in Darfur, in hospital beds in Port Sudan, in homes in Kasla, in military barracks, in villages without electricity, people were encountering Jesus. Not everyone, but enough. A mother in Darfur woke from a dream, weeping, whispering his name. A soldier in a bunker near the Ethiopian border saw him standing in the corner of the room, scarred hands extended. A teenage girl in a refugee camp, traumatized by years of violence, looked up from her mat and saw light filling the tent. An elderly imam in Port Sudan, alone in his study, fell from his chair as Jesus appeared before him with the same question he had asked me: "Will you accept my gift?" The encounters multiplied like seeds scattered across desperate soil. I watched the government scramble. Emergency meetings at 3 a.m. Military officials demanding explanations. Intelligence services trying to shut down internet access, but the videos spread faster than censorship could contain them. Religious councils fractured in real time. Some declared it mass delusion. Others remained conspicuously silent. A few brave voices whispered what they couldn't yet say publicly: "What if it's real?" The nation was being shaken to its foundation. Jesus turned to me, his presence still overwhelming, still impossible to process fully. "This will begin a harvest and a shaking," he said. "Sudan will not remain the same. Some will turn toward me. Others will harden against the truth. But no one will remain unchanged." Then he asked me the question that would determine everything: "Will you return and warn them?" I knew the cost instantly. As clearly as I had seen the vision, I saw what would happen to me. My title, gone. My family, fractured. My reputation, destroyed. My safety, ended. But I also knew this: truth had already conquered me. Silence was no longer possible. "Yes," I said, "I'll go back." Light exploded around me, and everything went white. Light exploded. And then, pain. Air rushed into lungs that hadn't drawn breath in 61 hours. My chest heaved. My throat burned. Every nerve ending in my body ignited simultaneously as consciousness slammed back into flesh. I gasped. My eyes opened to blinding fluorescent lights and the ceiling of a hospital room I didn't recognize. Machines erupted around me. Heart monitor screaming. Four-stand rattling. Alarms shrieking in discordant panic. Footsteps thundered in the hallway. A nurse appeared in the doorway, froze for one impossible second, then screamed, "Doctor! Dr. Usman! He's awake!" More footsteps. Doors slamming. Voices shouting overlapping commands. Dr. Khalid Usman burst into the room, his face a mixture of disbelief and medical urgency. Behind him, two more nurses, a medical resident, and, I recognized them even through the fog, two military officials in civilian clothes who had been stationed outside my door. Grand Ayatollah. Dr. Usman was at my bedside, shining a penlight into my eyes, checking my pulse manually despite the machines already reporting every vital sign. "Can you hear me? Do you know where you are?" I tried to speak. My throat was sandpaper. A nurse quickly brought water, helping me sip. "What?" I managed. "How long?" 61 hours, Dr. Usman said, still examining me with the intensity of a man witnessing something that violated everything he understood about medicine. "You've been unresponsive for 61 hours. Your vitals were stable the entire time. Perfect, actually, but you wouldn't wake. We ran every test. There was no explanation." He stepped back, staring at me like I was a miracle and a medical impossibility simultaneously. "There still isn't an explanation," he said quietly. "This shouldn't be possible." The door burst open again. My wife, Amina, still in the clothes she had been wearing when she found me collapsed in my study. Her face was drawn, eyes red from crying. When she saw me awake, sitting up, responsive, she let out a sound between a sob and a gasp. She rushed to my bedside, grabbing my hand, her touch grounding me back into physical reality. "Suleiman," she whispered, searching my face. "What happened to you?" The question hung in the air. Everyone in the room was looking at me. The medical staff, the military officials, my wife, all waiting for an answer that would make sense of the medically impossible. I looked at Amina, at her tear-stained face, at the fear and relief warring in her expression. And I said the only truth I had. I met Jesus. The room went completely silent. Dr. Usman's hand froze mid-reach for his stethoscope. The nurses exchanged glances. One of the military officials stepped forward slightly, suddenly alert in a different way. "What did you say?" Amina whispered. "I met Jesus Christ," I repeated, my voice stronger now. "I was somewhere else. I saw him. He spoke to me. He showed me what's coming to Sudan." No one moved. Then one of the military officials pulled out his phone, stepped into the hallway, and made a call. I couldn't hear the words, but I understood the urgency. Dr. Usman cleared his throat professionally. "Grand Ayatollah, you've experienced severe neurological trauma. It's common for patients who have been unconscious to experience vivid hallucinations or—" "It wasn't a hallucination," I interrupted gently but firmly. "I know what I experienced." Within an hour, the hospital room filled with different kinds of visitors. Religious officials from the Ministry of Religious Affairs. More military personnel. Intelligence officers who didn't bother introducing themselves. News had already spread. Grand Ayatollah Suleiman al-Mahdi wakes from impossible coma. But the story spreading faster, in whispers, in text messages, in hushed phone calls, was bigger. He's saying he met Jesus. He's claiming he saw a vision. Something's happened to the Sheikh of Stability. By evening, I was discharged under what Dr. Usman called mysterious circumstances. My medical file was sealed. I was told a security detail would accompany me home, for my protection. But I knew surveillance when I saw it. In the car ride home, with Amina sitting rigid beside me and two stone-faced officials in the front seat, the weight of what I carried pressed down on me. The vision. The warning. The encounter with Jesus that had shattered everything I thought I knew. I could stay silent. Resume my position. Dismiss what happened as medical trauma. Let life return to the carefully constructed stability I had built. Or I could speak. I looked out the window at Khartoum passing by, the city I had served, advised, guided for decades, and knew with absolute certainty. Silence was no longer possible. I could not be silent. I told Amina everything that first night home. We sat in our bedroom, the same room we had shared for 26 years, and I described what I had seen. The light. The exposure. Jesus. The vision of Sudan's future. She listened in silence, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her face becoming more strained with every word. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then the tears came. "You are killing our family," she whispered. "Do you understand that? Everything we've built. Our reputation. Our children's future. You are destroying it all." "Amina." "No." She stood abruptly. "I don't know what happened to you in that hospital. Maybe you had a vision. Maybe you had a breakdown. But if you speak about this publicly, they will destroy you. And us with you." She left the room. That was 3 months ago. She still hasn't asked me about it again. My eldest son, Omar, was more direct. He came to see me 2 days after I returned home, his jaw set in the same stubborn way I recognized from my own reflection. "Baba," he said, using the childhood name that felt suddenly distant, "people are saying you've gone insane." "I haven't." "Then why are you telling people you met Jesus? You are a Grand Ayatollah. You know what this means. You know what they'll do to you." "I know exactly what they'll do," I said quietly. "But I cannot stay silent about what I witnessed." He stared at me like I was a stranger. "Then you've lost your mind," he said, and walked out. Within a week, my students stopped coming to my classes. Colleagues who had sought my counsel for decades stopped returning calls. My assistant resigned without explanation. The Ministry of Religious Affairs issued a formal notice. Grand Ayatollah Suleiman al-Mahdi was being placed on medical leave pending a full psychiatric evaluation. My authority to issue fatwas was suspended indefinitely. Intelligence officers no longer bothered hiding their surveillance. A car parked permanently outside my house. My phone calls carry the telltale click of monitoring. Even my internet activity was being tracked. I could tell by the subtle delays in loading pages. Religious councils across Sudan issued carefully worded statements questioning my mental stability. The trauma of his medical episode has clearly affected the esteemed scholar's judgment, one statement read. Then the threats began. Anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night. Notes slipped under my door with single-sentence warnings. Silence is safer than testimony. A brick through my study window with a verse from the Quran about apostasy attached. But I had already made my decision. On 28th January, 2 weeks after waking from the coma, I set up a camera in a friend's apartment and recorded my full testimony. Everything. The encounter with Jesus. The vision of Sudan. The warning I had been sent back to deliver. 43 minutes of unfiltered truth. I gave the recording to someone I trusted, a former student who had quietly converted to Christianity years ago, but kept it hidden. I told him, when the time is right, release this. 3 days later, it appeared online. I still don't know if it was leaked intentionally or if someone intercepted it. Perhaps it doesn't matter. Perhaps the timing was never mine to control. The video went viral within hours. Millions of Sudanese watched a former Grand Ayatollah, pale and trembling but unwavering, say, "I met Jesus Christ. He is not merely a prophet. He is Lord. He died for our sins. He rose from the dead. And he is coming back to Sudan." Sudan erupted online. Hush Suleiman testimony trended for 3 days straight. The reaction split like a nation fracturing in real time. Mockery from those who called it mental breakdown. Curiosity from those who couldn't explain away my medical impossibility. Rage from religious authorities who saw it as the ultimate betrayal. And underneath it all, in private messages, in encrypted chats, in whispered conversations, secret hope from people who had been having their own dreams, their own encounters, their own questions about Jesus. The government convened emergency meetings. They considered arresting me, but intelligence officials warned it would make me a martyr and amplify the message they were trying to suppress. Underground Christian networks, small, scattered, mostly converts living in fear, began to mobilize. They shared the video. They prayed. They waited. Religious councils fractured. Some demanded my immediate excommunication. Others remained suspiciously silent, as if afraid to speak against something they couldn't fully dismiss. The panic spread among Sudan's religious and political elite like wildfire. And I went into hiding, moving between safe houses, recording testimonies from undisclosed locations, staying ahead of those who wanted me silenced. But the warning could no longer be stopped. The message was out. Sudan was watching. And Jesus was coming. This is where we are now. I'm recording this from another undisclosed location. By the time you watch this, I will have moved again. This is my reality now. Constant motion, strategic silence about my whereabouts, and the weight of a message I cannot stop carrying. But Sudan's reality is changing too. 3 months after my awakening, the nation stands at a crossroads. Divided. Questioning. Watching for what comes next. The government's attempts to contain the narrative have failed spectacularly. They blocked websites. They monitored social media. They pressured platforms to remove the video. But you cannot censor what God has set in motion. My testimony has been viewed over 8 million times across Sudan and the diaspora. It's been translated into 12 languages. It's been shared in refugee camps, discussed in universities, debated in mosques, and whispered about in government offices. But something more significant is happening beneath the surface. Reports are emerging from across Sudan. Reports the government cannot suppress because they're too widespread, too personal, too impossible to centralize and control. Dreams of Jesus. Visions in the night. Encounters in hospital rooms and refugee tents and private homes. A taxi driver in Khartoum told me he saw Jesus standing at the foot of his bed, asking him, "Do you know who I really am?" A university student in Port Sudan described a dream where Jesus showed her his scarred hands and said, "I did this for you." An elderly woman in Darfur, illiterate her entire life, suddenly began reciting words she had never learned: "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Muslim background believers, those who had quietly accepted Jesus years ago but lived in hiding, are cautiously coming forward. Secret house churches that existed in fear are experiencing something they never expected: inquiry from seekers who had their own supernatural encounters. Pastors are reporting unprecedented questions from people who saw my testimony and said, "If a Grand Ayatollah can encounter Jesus, maybe I should investigate this for myself." The vision I saw hasn't fully manifested yet. The sky has not torn open over the riverfront mosque. Jesus has not appeared in visible glory, at least not publicly. Not yet. But the signs are appearing. The shaking has begun. And in these 3 months of running, hiding, and watching Sudan wrestle with what I witnessed, I've had time to reflect on what I learned through it all. The lesson is simple, but it cost me everything to understand. Power cannot save you. Religion cannot perfect you. Only truth can free you. I spent 30 years building religious authority, political influence, and scholarly reputation. I believed my position was evidence of God's blessing. I thought my knowledge of sacred texts equaled closeness to God. I was wrong. Jesus didn't come to build politics. He came to rebuild hearts. He didn't come to establish another religious system. He came to offer relationship. He didn't come to reward the righteous. He came to save the broken. Sudan is experiencing both shaking and awakening right now. The religious establishment is fracturing. The political order is unstable. Fear is spreading among those who built kingdoms on sand. But hope is rising, in the quiet places, in the desperate prayers, in the hearts of people who are tired of empty religion and hungry for truth. If you are watching this, wherever you are, understand something. This is not just Sudan's story. This is a warning and an invitation being extended to every person who has ever wondered if there's more than what religion offers. To everyone who has questioned, who has doubted, who has felt the weight of trying to earn what can only be received as a gift. Jesus is not contained by our theological frameworks. He is not limited by our religious boundaries. He is not impressed by our titles or credentials. He is truth. And He is offering you the same thing He offered me: life. Freely given. Unearned. Undeserved. The question is, what will you do with this warning? Will you dismiss it as the ravings of a man who lost his mind? Will you explain it away with medical terminology and psychological analysis? Or will you consider the possibility that the Grand Ayatollah, who had everything to lose and nothing to gain by lying, might be telling you the truth? Sudan's shaking is just beginning. The vision I saw will come to pass. I don't know when, but I know it will. When the sky tears open and Jesus appears in glory over Khartoum, no one will remain unchanged. But you don't have to wait for that moment. You can encounter Him now, in the quiet of your own heart, in the privacy of your own questions, in the surrender of your own pride. Here's what I learned in that place between life and death. When fear spreads, hope will rise with it. When religious systems shake, hungry hearts awaken. When power crumbles, truth remains. If this testimony has reached you, please share it. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel so you can hear what happens next. Tell your loved ones. Post it where others might see it. Not for my sake, for theirs. Because Sudan's story is still unfolding. And so is yours. The warning has been given. The invitation has been extended. What you do with it now is between you and Jesus.